Right now, there are thousands of cables lying on the ocean floor. You can't see them, most people don't know they exist. But without them, no internet, no banking, no stock market, no military communications, no modern economy. $10 trillion every single day moving through those cables. And a former Pentagon intelligence official just issued a direct warning. China and Russia now have the ability to cut them, almost at will. This isn't a theory, this isn't speculation, and the timing, it couldn't be more dangerous. The warning came on Sunday, May 10th, 2026, the same day President Donald Trump is preparing to travel to Beijing for high-stakes meetings with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Trade, artificial intelligence, Taiwan. These are the items on the official agenda. But there's another item, one that isn't on any agenda. One that a former U.S. Pentagon official named Andrew Badger, now Chief Strategy Officer at defense technology startup Coalition Systems, felt compelled to put on the record publicly. Badger warned that adversaries like China can inflict devastating economic chaos almost at will by targeting the undersea cables that carry 99% of global data and support up to $10 trillion in daily financial transactions. That number, 10 trillion, every day. Let that settle for a moment. If you want fast, fact-based coverage of stories that actually affect your daily life, subscribe now, because this one goes deeper than almost anything else you'll see reported today. Let's build the picture from the ground up, because the full scope of what's being described here isn't obvious at first glance. The ocean floor is covered in cables, hundreds of them, spanning every ocean basin, connecting every continent. They look, at a glance, almost unimpressive. Thick rubber and metal tubes, not much wider than a garden hose in some sections. But these cables are the actual physical backbone of the modern world. Every email, every bank transfer, every stock trade, every military communication that travels internationally, it moves through these cables. Satellites carry only a tiny fraction of global data traffic. The cables carry 99%. That's not a figure open to debate. It is the established, documented reality of how the global internet is physically built. Now here is where the story takes a sharp turn. In April 2026, China's Ministry of Natural Resources officially confirmed a successful deep-sea mission that tested an advanced electro-hydrostatic actuator, a device capable of slicing through armored submarine cables at depths of 3,500 meters. 3,500 meters. That is nearly 2¼ miles beneath the ocean's surface. At that depth, no conventional repair crew can respond quickly. No diver goes there. Remotely operated vehicles take time to deploy, time to locate the break, and far more time to repair it. Weeks, sometimes months. China didn't deny this test. China's own government announced it. Taiwan has reported approximately 30 subsea cable incidents in recent years, including one in which Chinese vessels allegedly severed cables and cut communications for months. 30 incidents, around Taiwan alone. Now let's layer in the diplomatic backdrop. President Trump is meeting President Xi in Beijing right now. The discussions are expected to center on trade tariffs, AI governance, and the always volatile question of Taiwan's status. The United States considers itself Taiwan's principal security guarantor. China considers Taiwan its territory. Andrew Badger, a former Pentagon official, described the threat as asymmetric, warning that China and Russia are devoting far more resources to attacking undersea infrastructure than the US or its allies are to defending it. That asymmetry matters enormously, because what it means is this. The attack side of this equation is ahead of the defense side, and the targets, cables lying exposed on the ocean floor across thousands of miles, are essentially impossible to guard in full. Badger specifically stated that a coordinated strike on American undersea infrastructure could fundamentally disrupt our way of life. The internet, banking, energy markets, and military communications all run through these cables. And then he added something that stops you cold. The dollar cost is almost incalculable, he said. And the real damage would be the chaos and political instability that would follow. Not just economic disruption, political instability inside the United States. Which brings us to the part that hasn't received enough attention yet. This isn't just about cutting cables. It's about cutting confidence. cutting certainty, cutting the American public's belief that the government can protect the systems their daily lives run on. That's a different kind of weapon entirely. To understand why this warning is landing with such force right now, you have to understand what these cables actually connect and what it means when they go dark. Picture the trading floor of a major financial exchange. The millisecond transactions, the automated systems, the global currency markets. All of it requires real-time data transmission. Much of that data crosses oceans. It crosses through cables. Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming, the Republican whip, joined with Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire to introduce the bipartisan Strategic Subsea Cables Act of 2026 in April. Legislation aimed at strengthening the security and resilience of critical undersea infrastructure. Bipartisan. That word matters. In a Senate where almost nothing passes without a fight, two senators from opposite parties looked at the same intelligence picture and reached the same conclusion. This needs to be addressed, now. Barrasso's framing was stark. He stated that undersea cables carry 99% of the world's internet traffic and support $10 trillion in financial transactions each and every day. 10 trillion, daily. If even a fraction of that flow is disrupted, the ripple effects move at the speed of panic, through markets, through supply chains, through government bond yields, through every institution that depends on digital infrastructure. Now add the military dimension. Modern military operations depend on communications, command structures, real-time intelligence feeds, logistics coordination. All of it uses networks that are, at critical points, routed through undersea cables. A strike against civilian infrastructure and military communications is not two separate attacks. At the cable level, it can be the same attack. Badger warned that cables give Beijing and Moscow tremendous strategic leverage over the United States, leverage that could be deployed as a deterrent to U.S. engagement in Taiwan specifically. Think about what that means in strategic terms. If Washington is weighing whether to respond militarily to an action against Taiwan, and Beijing can simultaneously threaten to destabilize American banking, internet infrastructure, and military communications, the calculus changes. The political cost of intervention rises. The public pressure mounts faster. Do you think this kind of leverage actually changes how the U.S. responds to crises? Or are we more resilient than the warnings suggest? Drop your answer in the comments, because this question is at the heart of what's being debated in Washington right now. Similar suspicious disruptions have been reported in Europe and elsewhere, with analysts raising concerns about coordinated gray zone operations designed to probe Western responses while remaining below the threshold of open conflict. Gray zone. That phrase deserves a pause. It means activities that are hostile in intent and effect, but structured specifically to avoid triggering a formal military response. No declaration of war, no obvious act of aggression, just a ship dragging an anchor across a cable route, or a deep-sea vehicle on a scientific mission that happens to end near a critical communications node. Badger described the overall threat as hybrid warfare in its purest form, designed to weaken the adversary below the threshold of declared war, noting that incidents such as anchor dragging can provide plausible deniability. Plausible deniability. That's the key phrase. Because if you can't prove who cut the cable, if it could theoretically be a ship's anchor or a trawler's net or a geological shift, then the injured country faces a profound dilemma. Retaliate against whom? Based on what evidence? At what political cost domestically and internationally? It is a strategy built around the impossibility of a clean response. Here is what very few people are discussing right now. Trump is sitting down with Xi to negotiate on trade and Taiwan. Both sides want concessions. Both sides are looking for leverage. But here's the angle that cuts through the diplomatic surface. Badger stated directly that Beijing could simultaneously target cables landing in the U.S., not to win militarily, but with the goal of breaking the American public's will to intervene in Taiwan. Not to win a war, to break the public's will. That is a psychological operation against an entire population, and China already has the tool to do it. Verified, tested, at 3,500 meters depth, announced by their own government 1 month ago. So the question at the center of this summit isn't just about tariffs or trade volumes. It's whether Washington understands that Beijing may be negotiating from a position of concealed infrastructure leverage that no satellite or fighter jet can immediately counter. Let's step away from the geopolitical chessboard for a moment, because that's where a lot of coverage stays, at the level of strategy and government. But the human reality of what cable disruption looks like is worth understanding in concrete terms. When a single cable was cut near Taiwan in a recent incident, communications for certain communities were disrupted for months. Months. Not hours, not days. Months of degraded communications. For businesses trying to operate, for families trying to stay connected, for emergency services trying to coordinate, for financial systems trying to process transactions. That was one cable, one incident, one island. Now scale that image up. Imagine a coordinated strike targeting multiple cables simultaneously. Cables that serve not a small island, but the eastern seaboard of the United States, or the financial hubs of Europe, or the Pacific routes carrying AI data between research centers, cloud platforms, and government systems. The first thing most people would notice is the internet slowing or stopping. Not uniformly, not everywhere at once, but in patches. Certain services going dark. Banks reporting technical difficulties. Stock exchanges issuing trading halts. The word outage starting to trend everywhere. Then come the ATMs. Not all of them, but enough. People lining up to withdraw cash because the card networks aren't clearing reliably, grocery stores switching to cash only, gas stations offline. This is not a hypothetical drawn from fiction. This is a composite picture of what happens when critical communications infrastructure fails, drawn from real incidents around the world at smaller scale over the past decade. Badger acknowledged that the disruption would extend beyond economics, warning specifically of the chaos and political instability that would follow a coordinated cable strike. Political instability in the United States. That's the part that governments rarely say out loud. Because what he's describing is a scenario where a foreign power, without launching a single missile, without crossing a single border, generates the conditions for domestic social fracture, loss of confidence in institutions, finger-pointing between political parties, pressure on the presidency, potential market collapses feeding economic anxiety, feeding political anger. It's worth noting, as researchers have observed, that not every cable break is hostile. The International Cable Protection Committee estimates that 150 to 200 cable breaks occur per year globally, most of them accidental. Ships' anchors, fishing trawlers, geological shifts, these cause real damage without any adversaries' involvement. That ambiguity is itself part of the problem. It means that when a hostile actor cuts a cable, they can point to the accident statistics and say, "These things happen. It happens all the time. Prove it was us." And in the fog of that ambiguity, response is delayed. Assessment takes time. Attribution requires evidence, and the damage keeps compounding. There's one more layer to this that deserves direct attention: the artificial intelligence dimension. The article's sourcing specifically flags the Taiwan Strait as a critical artery for the AI revolution. The chips, the data flows, the cloud infrastructure supporting AI development at a global scale, all of it moves through physical cables. An Oxford Internet Institute researcher noted that the growth in AI's use means rising capacity demands on submarine cables. So this isn't just the internet of today at risk, it's the infrastructure of the next decade of technological development. The cables that carry AI training data, the cables that connect the data centers, the cables that make real-time AI applications function across continents. Cut those, and you don't just disrupt today's economy. You delay the technological development that governments and corporations are spending hundreds of billions of dollars to accelerate. Here is what intelligence analysts are watching right now. Trump will meet Xi in Beijing in the coming days. Trade concessions, AI governance, Taiwan status, and semiconductor supply chains are all on the table. What's not officially on the table, but almost certainly in the room, is the question of undersea infrastructure and what both sides know about each other's capabilities. Does Washington raise the cable-cutting technology directly? Does Beijing use it as unspoken background leverage? Does the Strategic Subsea Cables Act move quickly through the Senate, or does it get buried in committee while the threat continues to grow? And here's the scenario that nobody wants to name directly. If trade talks collapse, if Taiwan tensions spike, if Washington moves towards stronger military commitments to Taipei, at what point does Beijing calculate that the costs of a cable disruption are lower than the cost of losing leverage entirely? That calculation is not rhetorical. Former Pentagon officials are making it. Senators are legislating against it. And the technology to carry it out already exists. Step back now and look at the arc of what's been described here. For decades, military planners thought primarily in terms of visible assets: ships, planes, missiles, troops. The competition for strategic advantage was about hardware that could be photographed from satellites, tracked by radar, counted in arms control treaties. The undersea cable threat represents something fundamentally different. It's an attack surface that doesn't look like one. It's infrastructure that every modern nation depends on, but almost no civilian population thinks about. It sits in a legal gray zone: international waters, depths beyond easy monitoring, damage patterns that can mimic accidents. And it's a domain where, according to the warning issued this week, the adversaries are currently ahead. Badger's core argument was that this is an asymmetric threat, with China and Russia investing far more in the capacity to attack undersea infrastructure than the US and its allies are investing in defending it. That gap between offensive investment and defensive preparation is exactly the kind of vulnerability that gets exploited in moments of high diplomatic tension. Not necessarily through direct, obvious attack, but through demonstrated capability, through letting the other side know you can do it, through using that knowledge as an unspoken weight on every negotiation. The Trump-Xi summit happens against this backdrop. Trade figures, tariff schedules, and semiconductor export rules will dominate the press coverage. But somewhere in that room will be an awareness, on both sides, of what the other side knows about the ocean floor. Meanwhile, the bipartisan legislation in the Senate signals that at least some corners of Washington have registered the urgency. The Strategic Subsea Cables Act of 2026 is designed to strengthen the security and resilience of the undersea cable network. But legislation moves slowly, appropriations move slowly, and the physical work of hardening thousands of miles of ocean floor cable moves even more slowly. The cables themselves aren't going anywhere. They're the same cables they were before anyone issued these warnings. The question is whether the countries that depend on them can build adequate awareness, monitoring, and deterrence fast enough to matter. What intelligence agencies are watching right now isn't just what happens in Beijing's conference rooms. They're watching the South China Sea shipping lanes. They're watching vessels with deep-sea research equipment. They're tracking the gap between what governments say publicly and what their naval assets are doing quietly. And somewhere, 2 miles beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean, cables built to last decades are carrying $10 trillion of transactions today. Tomorrow, the summit begins. This story isn't going to be resolved in a press conference or a joint statement. The cables are still down there. The technology to cut them has been tested. The legislation to address the vulnerability is still moving through committee. What happens in Beijing over the next several days, and what happens in the Senate over the next several weeks, will shape whether this warning is remembered as a moment when things changed or as a window that was missed. What do you think? Does Washington have a real plan to protect this infrastructure? Or are we reacting to a threat that's already years ahead of us? Drop your analysis in the comments below. And subscribe right now, because as the Trump-Xi summit unfolds and the cable security legislation moves forward, this story will develop fast, and you'll want every major update the moment it breaks.